Chapter 35 of A Short Life of Abraham Lincoln. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Leader. A Short Life of Abraham Lincoln, by John G. Nicolay, Chapter 35. Description of Confederate Currency. Rigor of Conscription. Dissatisfaction with the Confederate Government. Lee, General-in-Chief. J.E. Johnston reappointed to oppose Sherman's march. Value of slave property gone in Richmond. Davis's recommendation of emancipation. Benjamin's last despatch to Slidell. Condition of the army when Lee took command. Lee attempts negotiations with Grant. Lincoln's directions. Lee and Davis agree upon line of retreat. Assault on Fort Stedman. Five Forks. Evacuation of Petersburg. Surrender of Richmond. Pursuit of Lee. Surrender of Lee. Burning of Richmond. Lincoln in Richmond. From the hour of Mr. Lincoln's re-election, the Confederate cause was doomed. The cheering of the troops which greeted the news from the North was heard within the lines at Richmond and at Petersburg, and although the leaders maintained their attitude of defiance, the impression rapidly gained ground among the people that the end was not far off. The stimulus of hope being gone, they began to feel the pinch of increasing want. Their currency had become almost worthless. In October, a dollar in gold was worth $35 in Confederate money. With the opening of the new year, the price rose to $60, and despite the efforts of the Confederate Treasury, which would occasionally rush into the market and beat down the price of gold 10 or 20% a day, the currency gradually depreciated until 100 for 1 was offered and not taken. It was natural for the citizens of Richmond to think that monstrous prices were being extorted for food, clothing, and supplies, when in fact they were paying no more than was reasonable. To pay $1,000 for a barrel of flour was enough to strike a householder with terror, but $10 is not a famine price. High prices, however, even if paid in dry leaves, are a hardship when dry leaves are not plentiful, and there was scarcity even of Confederate money in the South. At every advance of Grant's lines a new alarm was manifested in Richmond, the first proof of which was always a fresh rigor in enforcing the conscription laws and the arbitrary orders of the frightened authorities. After the capture of Fort Harrison, north of the James, squads of guards were sent into the streets with directions to arrest every able-bodied man they met. It is said that the medical boards were ordered to exempt no one capable of bearing arms for 10 days. Human nature will not endure such a strain as this, and desertion grew too common to punish. As disaster increased, the Confederate government steadily lost ground in the confidence and respect of the Southern people. Mr. Davis and his counselors were doing their best, but they no longer got any credit for it. From every part of the Confederacy came complaints of what was done, demands for what was impossible to do. Some of the States were in a condition near to counter-revolution. A slow paralysis was benumbing the limbs of the insurrection, and even at the heart its vitality was plainly declining. The Confederate Congress, which had hitherto been the mere register of the President's will, now turned upon him. On January 19 it passed a resolution making Lee General-in-Chief of the army. This Mr. Davis might have borne with patience, although it was intended as a notification that his meddling with military affairs must come to an end. But far worse was the bitter necessity put upon him as a sequel to this act of reappointing General Joseph E. Johnston to the command of the army which was to resist Sherman's victorious march to the North. Mr. Seddon, rebel Secretary of War, thinking his honor impugned by a vote of the Virginia delegation in Congress, resigned. Warnings of serious demoralization came daily from the army, and disaffection was so rife in official circles in Richmond that it was not thought politic to call public attention to it by measures of repression. It is curious and instructive to note how the act of emancipation had by this time virtually enforced itself in Richmond. The value of slave property was gone. It is true that a slave was still occasionally sold at a price less than 1/10 of what he would have brought before the war, but servants could be hired of their nominal owners for almost nothing, merely enough to keep up a show of vassalage. In effect, anyone could hire a negro for his keeping, which was all that anybody in Richmond, black or white, got for his work. Even Mr. Davis had at least become docile to the stern teaching of events. In his message of November he had recommended the employment of 40,000 slaves in the army, not as soldiers, it is true, save in the last extremity, with emancipation to come. On December 27, Mr. Benjamin wrote his last important instruction to John Slidell, the Confederate commissioner in Europe. It is nothing less than a cry of despair. Complaining bitterly of the attitude of foreign nations while the South is fighting the battles of England and France against the North, he asks, "Are they determined never to recognize the Southern Confederacy until the United States assent to such action on their part?" And with a frantic offer to submit to any terms which Europe might impose as the price of recognition, and a scarcely veiled threat of making peace with the North unless Europe should act speedily, the Confederate Department of State closed its 4 years of fruitless activity. Lee assumed command of all the Confederate armies on February 9. His situation was one of unprecedented gloom. The day before he had reported that his troops, who had been in line of battle for 2 days at Hatcher's Run, exposed to the bad winter weather, had been without meat for 3 days. A prodigious effort was made, and the danger of starvation, for the moment, averted, but no permanent improvement resulted. The armies of the Union were closing in from every point of the compass. Grant was every day pushing his formidable left wing nearer the only roads by which Lee could escape. Thomas was threatening the Confederate communications from Tennessee. Sheridan was riding for the last time up the Shenandoah Valley to abolish Early, while from the south the redoubtable columns of Sherman were moving northward with the steady pace and irresistible progress of a tragic fate. A singular and significant attempt at negotiation was made at this time by General Lee. He was so strong in the confidence of the people of the South, and the government at Richmond was so rapidly becoming discredited, that he could doubtless have obtained the popular support and compelled the assent of the executive to any measures he thought proper for the attainment of peace. From this it was easy for him and for others to come to the wholly erroneous conclusion that General Grant held a similar relation to the government and people of the United States. General Lee seized upon the pretext of a conversation reported to him by General Longstreet as having been held with General E.O.C. Ord under an ordinary flag of truce for the exchange of prisoners, to address a letter to Grant, sanctioned by Mr. Davis, saying he had been informed that General Ord had said General Grant would not decline an interview with a view "to a satisfactory adjustment of the present unhappy difficulties by means of a military convention," provided Lee had authority to act. He therefore proposed to meet General Grant, with the hope that it may be found practicable to submit the subjects of controversy to a convention of the kind mentioned, professing himself authorized to do whatever the result of the proposed interview may render necessary. Grant at once telegraphed these overtures to Washington. Stanton received the despatch at the Capitol, where the President was, according to his custom, passing the last night of the session of Congress, for the convenience of signing bills. The Secretary handed the telegram to Mr. Lincoln, who read it in silence. He asked no advice or suggestion from anyone about him, but,